Welcome to another edition of Market Impact Insights, your podcast source for business leadership perspectives to help your business grow. Hear from experts in marketing, sales, business strategy, and more, with practical advice for business success. Make sure you won't miss the latest episodes by visiting marketimpactnow.com. Now, here's your host, Dan Albaum.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of Market Impact Insights. The philosophy that drives this podcast is that in business, it's all about making a positive impact every day. There's no greater area to make that impact. If you're developing a product, you're trying to grow your market share, create competitive differentiation, then what kind of user experience are you creating? And I saw some really interesting stats related to just the value, the importance of user experience. Every dollar invested in user experience design, some of these estimates are $10 to $100. That's an ROI of up to 10,000%. Of course, traffic to your website. What kind of experience are you creating there? Through that, 88% of users won't return to a website after a bad user experience. And then, of course, in terms of being proactive, to strategically address user experience, it can cost up to 100 times more to fix a problem after you develop your product than it does to fix it during the design phase. We're to get into all of this. How are we bringing in new technology like AI to create more compelling user experiences with Dr. Kenya Oduor. And she uses data-informed insights to streamline systems, elevate tech, and create meaningful and sustainable experiences. Kenya is the CEO and founder of Geeks, but she has a deep experience around user experience and design. She was the director of user experience at LexisNexis. She was a user experience engineer and project manager at IBM. And today she's partnering with companies, product managers, product owners to identify and define market problems to solve. She really helps translate those opportunities into wireframes, workflows that communicate the user experience using a human factors expert approach. And some of the results really just stopped me in my tracks. 22% in speed to market, we're getting faster and there's velocity. She's helping create project cost reductions of up to 56%. Kenya, what an impact. Welcome to Market Impact Insights.
Hey, Dan, I'm so happy to be here. And I love the stats that you started with, because every time I hear them, I just wonder why everyone's not focused on and investing in user experience within their products and services.
Yeah, it's so important, and especially in hyper-competitive markets, high-change environments in technology. And I really want to learn a little bit more about your journey. What originally sparked your passion to focus your career around technology?
That's a great question. It almost was by happenstance. I started out with an interest in engineering. Like many students, went through the zig and zag of figuring out myself and what and where I really should be in terms of a career. Moved and went to graduate school for human factors, moved just to go to graduate school at NC State. And it was there that I stumbled on an opportunity at IBM in the software group as a co-op while I'm in graduate school. And I got to see firsthand how fascinating it was to apply what I was learning in the graduate classroom in a software and technology organization. And that's when I realized this is my thing, this is my place.
Yeah, isn't it? It's amazing. And sometimes the path we take, it's not necessarily something that we're planning ahead, but through an actual moment or life experience, we realize kind of where we're centered and what our passion is. And there's nothing better than being able to actually pursue a passion, not just a career in terms of just, I'm here for a paycheck. But no, when the light bulb goes off and it clicks, isn't it different that way?
Yes, it's so different and it's so rewarding, because in many instances, it does not feel like work. It feels like you're just applying what you know and what you do to your passion, which I love.
So when you reflect back on your journey so far, what's been some of the biggest learning you've taken from that? And have there been surprises for you along the way?
Yeah, so my biggest learning has been not to take it personally. When things don't go the way that you hope they do, when people don't receive your ideas as you'd hope and expect, don't take it personally in a lot of instances has been my mantra. And in that, I look at the fact that I have a motivation and a goal doesn't mean that the person I'm partnering with has the same goal in mind. And so it's meeting in the middle and figuring that out in that learning process. Surprises along the way have been the fact that in my journey in looking at what user experience means to organizations, especially technology organizations, some of the challenges that I saw 20 plus years ago in my career, some of those challenges still exist. And there are still people that truly don't understand what user experience means. It's not just about making something pretty. And so I think that there's still that evangelism and education component that sometimes surprises me that I'm still having these same conversations, but that just means that there's still more work to do.
Yeah, there's so much packed in there. And I want to circle back and dive in a little bit. When you were talking about the learning of not taking things personally, we can all relate to that. And it seems sometimes that if we're really heavily invested in our jobs and in what we create, kind of our intellectual contributions, and it can be so hard when you get feedback that is, quote, constructive, or maybe it's not just, pure admiration or pure agreement. We get into some debate over that. It can be tough for that not to be soul crushing. Were there some things that you had to practice or you had to learn? Like, how did you get over that hump of just the natural defensiveness around that?
Yeah, I think I got over it because if you hit your head against the wall enough times, you realize that you got to do something differently than hit your head against the wall.
Yeah.
Part of that is accepting constructive feedback. And so, for example, I'll never forget, I had a peer who, whenever I'd go to him and say, "Did you read my email? Did you read my email?" "No, I have not. I haven't read it yet." And finally, after me asking repeatedly, he admitted, "Your emails are too long. Get to the point." And he didn't say it that way, of course, but essentially I took away from that, get to the point. And so I recognized my writing style coming from academia, coming from being a graduate student, my writing style did not work in corporate. And so I had to learn how to distill down the key points, understand what I'm trying to communicate, and what is the takeaway or action. And so those are some of the learnings that I feel I have taken from my experiences, but also understanding that that just made me more effective moving forward in my role.
Yeah. Was some of that too just getting more comfortable with the nuances and kind of the judgment call on how to communicate, like what medium? Because sometimes I think people rely on the convenience of email when actually there are some topics that are really better suited for more of a interactive dialogue, that maybe that's a live conversation or a Zoom call. Was there some of that nuance of like even what tactic to use to try to connect with people?
That's a great point. And yes, that was a big part of it is understanding your audience, understanding what you need to communicate to that audience. And as my role within organizations before starting my company, as my role expanded within organizations and as I became an entrepreneur, I recognized that I was becoming more strategic in the work that I was doing and the role that I played with around a project. And so that meant that being more strategic, to your point, you can't always communicate or transact via an email. Sometimes it requires that conversation, and sometimes it requires, getting in front of a whiteboard, hashing out ideas, getting to or building consensus.
Yeah. And many times it's not just, hey, we're going to have one conversation, get to resolution. Sometimes it's an iterative process, right? Where and having that discipline and the patience to kind of work through something instead of just a rush to no, we've got to get, everything, quote, resolved in one sitting.
Yes, I'm sitting here shaking my head. Yes, because that's I think one of the challenges that I've overcome in my career is understanding that no doesn't always mean no. In many instances, it means let's go back or come back to the table to discuss this further to better understand, are we on the same page, and how do we get to a place where we're creating the right go forward plan?
Well, there are so many companies that are out there. They're talking about user experience. They say it's important. They're investing in it. They've got teams that are specifically focused on that. But what are some of those continuing challenges you're seeing in delivering a truly compelling and meaningful user experience?
Having the right talent in your organization to drive forward initiatives from the top down is necessary. So having a seat at the table and a voice that matters within the organization that can help impact the culture, the ways of working around user experience initiatives. A lot of companies see user experience as a discipline in and of itself that sits within an organization on a team. But I'd argue that user experience and the capabilities around it are something that you can have across different disciplines within your organization. And it requires teaching your or empowering your team members how to look at what they do and doing it in a way that delivers a better user and customer experience. That's number one. Number two is, for me, balancing when you do get that user experience feedback from the market, being able to distill out what aligns to your vision, and also how you balance that feedback with your revenue goals, revenue targets, revenue growth. Sometimes the feedback you get from engaging your customer, it can work against you in terms of what your revenue goals are or revenue targets. And I don't always agree with that practice, but software companies are in business to make money. And so it's being able to, and even as a user experience professional, being able to understand that that is a part of the way things are done.
Yeah, I've always felt, having worked at several technology companies myself, that what I saw sometimes is that there's an under investment in going out and actually asking the customer and going into listen mode, because what you hear sometimes can challenge your internal assumptions. And that can be very disconcerting. It can be very jarring. If it upsets a narrative that's so easily developed internally, which says, hey, now we're spot on and we're excited, and this beautiful solution that we've built, and it can be hard to kind of open yourself up to that. But I know you've put a lot of time and effort into helping others go out and connect with customers, and there's really no substitute for constantly going out and getting that feedback, is there?
That's right. And one of my motivations for starting my own company is recognizing that capturing that feedback is critical for your organization, for your product or service, but it's also important to capture that feedback from an objective party. So using a third party who is invested in helping bring back the good, the bad, and the ugly, you more effectively have a more honest picture of what your customer needs, how they feel about your product, where your product sits within their workflows. Those things are hard to capture sometimes when you're too close to something.
Yeah, that objective perspective, and kind of sifting through the internal noise, if you will, right? To get
That's
more of an
right.
accurate picture. It's very valuable to do that. And you touched on executive leadership a little bit earlier, but where do you see company culture and that most senior leadership playing a role in being able to ultimately deliver the best user experience?
Well, I think it's always, to your earlier point, I think it's always getting that feedback, that customer feedback, knowing that it's not just a one and done sort of exercise, knowing that individuals within different areas of the organization, not just your user experience team, have the opportunity to go and capture that data, to go and connect with customers in their role. And it's not just about, selling to them, it's listening. It's not just about solving their problem when they're calling support. It's about also listening. So there's an opportunity for different areas within the company and different individuals within the company to look at themselves as user experience practitioners. And when you think about your user experience team within your organization, when you see them as a consultant within the organization, they should treat other teams and individuals within that organization as customers as well. So how can we better serve you to empower you, to train you, to help you take to glean insights from the data you've collected? Those are really, really effective ways within an organization to leverage user experience across the entire company.
Yeah, I think that C-suite behavior is under so much visibility, right? Inside of an organization, it's so influential. Not just the words of the senior leaders, but just how do they behave? How do they act? How do they engage? And I had one CEO that was just so passionate about every opportunity that he had to be able to meet in person with customers. Maybe it was over dinner, or maybe it was during a tour there at the offices, that his behavior was to proactively put himself right in front of the customer and to ask questions. And once you have a C-suite that's doing that on a regular basis, it seems like then that becomes kind of goes a little bit viral inside the company. And right, it's just a lot easier for others to just start making that a priority.
That's right. That's right. And to know the key in those conversations is to avoid always leading with your product. Think about asking questions that relate to your customer's motivation, their needs, their goals, their context. Those are the things that matter. Your product is just one piece of their ecosystem. So you want to understand all those other things that they're doing and using in that context as well.
Yeah, it's really like just having a natural curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the curiosity then drives the questions and the listening.
That's right. That's right.
So we've got to get to this, Kenya. I mean, everyone's talking about AI, and it's having such an impact on the way we think and how we do our work. Where do you see AI playing the biggest role? What kind of impact is it having around customer relationships and customer experience?
I believe AI has, or we have the biggest opportunity to leverage AI in using it as an opportunity to collect data, to listen to our customer, and to capture, the voice of the customer and that insight around, like those things I just mentioned, their needs, their motivations, their context. I see it as a way for us to gather that information more efficiently and effectively. Today, for me and for my team, the most difficult part of any project is gathering or capturing customer data. The recruitment effort, getting them to actually engage, all of those things are the most time consuming part of a project. And so having AI as a part of that particular set of tasks makes it a lot easier to capture that data, organize that data, and to get those insights out of it more quickly. I do believe that you still need to consider in that process, where is there a human involved, of course, and I'm sure we'll talk about that some more, but I think that there's definitely the need to still have some human oversight and synthesis of that information.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because there have been a lot of concerns raised. It says that AI seems to have all this potential, but we need to be very careful not to just turn over everything and kind of relinquish the human element because of quality control. Because let's face it, some of these models still can mess up. And I'd love to hear more from your perspective on how to best blend and create the right balance between human intervention and then fully leveraging those AI, more automated components.
Absolutely. Way back when, I studied automation and the spectrum of automation from fully manual to fully autonomous, and what that means for the human in the loop. And so as we look at where we are today with AI, it's a very similar model in terms of what decisions is that technology making in the background without human intervention, versus where does a person need to be involved so that if something goes wrong, they can intervene, or so that they can do a more effective job. And so when we think about where things are going, there's a huge opportunity to look at AI not as a replacement for what we do in all cases, but as a teammate. So when you think about roles that you've played or work that you've done where you had a really effective teammate and you guys were able to play off of each other's strengths really well, you could disseminate the tasks and come back together with what you both are good at, and it helped you do a better or more effective job. So I believe looking at AI as a teammate and not so much as, the enemy is or the replacement is where we need to be more focused, and looking at the fact that in that, transparency and trust are, for me, the two biggest areas of focus that we need to have right now.
It feels like training and just getting more kind of a hands-on experience with that new teammate AI to get people over their fear factor around it is so important. What was important for your team, in terms of just the learning and getting more comfortable with using the new AI tools? Was there a certain protocol you used, or what has seemed to work for you to get everyone a little bit more experienced and comfortable with it?
I have seen where myself or someone else on the team using the technology and then demoing or showing others what they've done, and the cost savings or time savings in having AI be a partner in certain activities like qualitative research, for example, where you have your note taker in the background that is transcribing the conversation. You now have a more accurate record of the conversation that allows you as the interviewer to go back and look at that data and see where you may have missed something, or maybe you weren't able to make connections in the information because you were driving the conversation. Now you have everything recorded in a way that it makes it a lot easier for you to connect the dots between one conversation and another, for example. So having the opportunity to demonstrate to one another how that becomes a valuable aspect of the way we work and how it changes the way we work in some ways is really helpful in getting people on board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's sharing that experience with others. It's just going to create a greater comfort level. And you've taken that entrepreneurial turn. You founded your own company now. And so now being able to look at it in terms of building that business, what do you think separates truly exceptional leadership from just good enough?
That's a really good question. What I have seen in my experience as an entrepreneur is exceptional leaders follow the 25-foot rule, which means that they get out of the way. They recognize that there's a problem. They recognize potentially that there's an opportunity to do things differently or better, but they get out of the way and empower their team, those that are within 25 feet of that opportunity or that problem. They allow them to provide the partnership, the input, the insight around what that problem really is. Where we've seen the least success are projects where leaders feel that they have to be the ones to articulate what the problem is without considering the fact that those that are right in front of the problem within 25 feet of it have a lot more context and understanding than they do. I've also seen where leaders are willing to invest in slowing down to capture their customer's journey, to capture their customer's workflow. Those activities go such a long way in really understanding where opportunities lie, but also where AI can come in or be introduced. Without mapping out that workflow or that journey of your customer, you really are just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to figure out where can we inject AI just so that we can sound like we have a sexy product like everyone else in the market.
Yeah, I love so much about what you're saying there, because there's elements of something I'm really passionate about, which is servant leadership in there, because you talked about empowerment. You talked about putting team and customer needs first, setting personal ego aside. And that can be really hard to do for the senior leaders, isn't it? Because we can fall into that trap of, well, I've got to show that I'm the smartest person in the room, don't I? And
That's
that's a bad thing, right? Because you're really creating the wrong kind of message, sending the wrong message to the team.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
I love that question. Uh, Appropriate persistence. What I have learned, especially as an entrepreneur, is that appropriate persistence is necessary to close the deal because you are not the first thing on someone's mind when they wake up in most instances. When you don't hear from someone, when they're not as receptive as you'd expect them to be, when you've talked to them and you get off the phone excited and you don't hear from them again, it is not personal. It requires a level of appropriate persistence to continue to nurture the relationship, to continue to be on their mind to some extent. And if you engage or connect with people, and there doesn't always have to be an opportunity in front of you, but if you have an appropriate level of persistence in knowing that let's stay connected, let's continue the conversation, you never know what can come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the big part of that probably a lot of us struggle with is just knowing where to set the line on quote appropriate. Like,
Right.
and I was having a recent conversation with someone who is trying to seek some new career opportunities, and they tempering how they were approaching the follow-up communication because they didn't want to be seen as someone who was a nuisance or just, being too over communicative, in that. And so where do you find drawing that line? It can be hard to do.
Yeah, I think it depends on the circumstance. If, to your point, you don't want to become a pest, um, it's about following up with authenticity and some level of genuine inquiry or concern or care or interest. And when you do that, I mean, you think about your personal relationships. When you check in with people on a personal level, and you check in, with a follow up from the last conversation, or to check in on how something is going based on what you've read in that particular, area of what you may have discussed in the past. When you're just genuine about it, I think it comes across less salesy and less, you being or having a motivation that is only selfish, which I think is important.
Yeah. So make it more about them and make it kind of value added instead of just another follow-up message about you.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. As you think about the future, there's so much going on in the world today. And that on the business side, politics, it's a complex place. What makes you optimistic?
I feel like there's a shift in the universe right now, and I feel like people are, for better or for worse, are having to pause and reflect and look at where we are as a society. What does capitalism really mean to us as a country and as a globe? And I think that people, when I look at the way that young people move through society right now and their interests and what matters to them, I realize that, some of us who have been in the game a little bit longer are driven or are more driven around doing and capturing and making money. And I feel like some of the younger generation are showing us that, pausing and taking care of yourself and knowing where to draw the line between work and life. I think that what makes me optimistic is that they are the next generation, for better or for worse. They're going to force us to look at things differently.
Yeah. And that's another aspect of interesting dynamic to leadership today, which is the multi-generational teams. So in
Yes.
many times, right, we've got people that are at different time frames in their career. And you've got some of the newer generation, the Gen Zs in there. Maybe you still got baby boomers or millennials, and it's all kind of mixed together. So that can be an amazing blended recipe, right? To create something truly special. But it is interesting, isn't there, where you get those different perspectives?
Absolutely. And I've always been of the mindset that you can learn a lot from people who have been here and have been doing it longer. And I just hope that as the younger generation continues to move through the workforce, that they recognize that some of us more seasoned folks have a lot to contribute and have a perspective that's a lot richer in some cases
Yes.
that can add to, the way things are done.
Yeah, absolutely. Because things like ageism, in terms of really
Yes,
limiting opportunities for people that are really far along in their career, unfortunately, that seems to be growing as well. And so we just need to be cognizant of that and hopefully encouraging all levels of experience to come together and create the best possible solutions.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any other final advice for leaders that are looking to deliver the most amazing user experience and elevate the performance of their teams?
I do. So we like to look at projects as two sides of the coin. And so when you look at like I mentioned earlier, your customer's workflow or their journey, mapping that out and talking through or speaking to that when you're ideating and creating and developing. But on the other side of that coin is your employees' experience. So who are the people within that workflow, that customer workflow? Who are the people that are touching that customer from a front office and back office perspective? So the people that are actually touching that customer versus the ones that are managing systems on the back end. When you line those two things up and you speak to ideas from from that context and from those pictures, you can get so much more richness in terms of, are we building the right thing and solving the right problems?
Kenya, how can we find you?
You can find me on Linktree at Dr. Kenya O. That's Dr. Kenya O. You can find me there on Linktree. We can set up time to talk. You can see some case studies and other information about me and my company.
Wow, there's so much there to learn and to grow. Please go out and engage with Kenya. And thank you again for joining, sharing your journey, sharing why user experience is so critical strategically to the success of any company. It was inspiring.
I appreciate that. That's all I hope to do.
And a reminder, please continue to give the gift of feedback to help make this podcast even better. You can do that by going out and providing a rating and a review. It's so easy to do on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And as always, make sure to visit marketimpactnow.com for the latest in business leadership perspectives. So long until next time.